Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your Oyster Ninja. And today I got a local oyster farmer on here, Mike from Sapidus, the happy oyster, not the mean oyster, the happy oyster. What's going on, man?
Same old, just delivering oysters here in the DMV.
How long have you had your oyster farm?
Sapidus Farms started in 2009, officially. That's when we formed our S Corp. And we're on the Great Wicomico River in the northern neck of Virginia. So the peninsula created by the Potomac and the Rappahannock is the northern neck. All the way at the tip of that, just off the Chesapeake Bay, is the Great Wicomico, which is actually kind of confusing because there's two rivers named Wicomico in Maryland waters, one that feeds maybe Chop Tank, something like that, out on the eastern shore, another one that feeds the Potomac. And then there's the Great Wicomico where we are, and right next to the Great Wicomico is the Little Wicomico. So, yeah, lots of geography.
What's the flavor profile in your oysters, man?
So we are in the middle of the bay, so middle salinity. We average between 18 and 20 parts per thousand. So it's a sweeter oyster, sort of a butter or cream up front, a little bit of brine on the back end. It's there, but it's not as strong as something from the ocean. And the most common adjective we hear used to describe the taste is clean. We have a ton of oysters living in the Great Wicomico. Filter feeders clean the water, and that cleanliness comes through in the flavor of our happy oysters.
So when you say a lot of oysters, do you mean wild and farm raised?
Both. Yep. So the state of Virginia has done 3 reef rehab projects in our river, set those aside as sanctuary. And so there's a huge wild oyster population. And there are a number of other operations farming oysters on the Great Wicomico. Some of the bigger operations that do spat on shell and bottom culture, they actually use the Great Wicomico as sort of their natural hatchery. So they'll drop shell down, let it sit for the set, pull it up, and then replant it on the Rappahannock and even further south as well. So, yeah, definitely a good breeding ground, which is great for us too, because we actually started a hatchery 4 years ago. And so we're breeding everything in-house and we're doing all triploids. We have a licensing agreement set up with Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences so we can get all of our brood stock there and um, offer triploid oysters for our farm and hopefully in the near future for more than just the few farms that we've been selling to. We're really trying to get seed production off the ground so we can feed as many oyster farms as we can handle.
So what are triploid oysters?
So a triploid oyster is a non-reproductive oyster. It's a breeding technique. So little history. There is a guy, I believe it was Dr. Standish Allen, I think was his name, and he was a professor, I believe, at Rutgers, and he was looking at the genetics of oysters, and he found in the wild diploid oysters, triploid oysters, and tetraploid oysters. And that's just basically the number of chromosomes that they have determining their sex. So diploid means they get one chromosome from each parent. Triploid means they get two from one parent and one from the other. And tetraploid means they get two and two. The triploids are always non-reproductive. They don't go through the sexing cycle that the wild oysters go through. Um, and you get a triploid by crossing a diploid and a tetraploid. So he came up with a process to produce tetraploids, and then I guess that patent got sold to College of William and Mary, which has the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences, and so now they license out the tetraploid technology, quote unquote, to farms really all over the Chesapeake Bay, Eastern Shore, Mid Atlantic, kind of the whole region gets their triploid gene lines from Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences.
Thank you for the science breakdown.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about having wild oysters near your oyster farm.
Mhm.
So do you have issues with like little oyster spats getting on your oysters?
Yeah, so we definitely get secondary spat accumulation. We I've been doing this for long enough that I've started to see the cycles that our river goes through, and it seems like every third or fourth year there's a massive oyster strike, but the years in between are pretty mild. Usually those years in between though are taken up by another filter feeder of some kind. So we'll have a mussel strike one year, or we'll have a barnacle strike one year, or a tunicate strike one year. And the tunicates are my least favorite of the bunch. Down by us, they call them dog stones or toad eggs, but they're sea squirts, little balls of gooey. They're kind of like a Gushers candy with like a leathery outside as opposed to the nice soft chewy outside. And they are incredibly heavy and they are incredibly thick when they strike. So they load up on our cages and they basically make them very heavy and cumbersome. And so far, I haven't come up with a really good use for them. We tried to sell them as food for a little while and got approval from the Virginia Department of Health. Apparently, there are countries in the world where tunicates are considered a delicacy. I think a different species of tunicate than what we have, but we worked with one of our chefs in Baltimore that we've known for a long time, and we got them on the menu at his restaurant and tried them out. They just did not catch on, and that's fair. Taste wise, they taste fine. Texture wise, um, off putting would be the way I would describe it.
Yeah, they don't look very tasty, but I'm sure, if you get the right chef, I'll give it a chance. But yeah, just looking at it, I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. He was very creative, came up with some great ideas. They're a difficult item to work with for sure.
What did you do before you was an oyster farmer? Like, does it run in the family, or how'd you get into this lane?
I kind of fell backwards into this. I used to be a high school American government teacher in Southern Maryland. My parents bought a house on the water down on the Great Wicomico. I had summers off and I was down there fishing. I got to know an old timer, E. Delano. He was a tonger and a dredger, did soft crabs, the whole traditional waterman life. And he had a shop up the street from where I stayed when I went down there. And he and I don't know, I went in to buy oysters and crabs, and eventually he and I kind of became buddies. So after a few years of teaching, I realized I did not like the bureaucracy of the public school system so much. And he had his fourth, I believe it was his fourth stroke in the boat. And he worked alone, so that was kind of sketchy. His wife said, "You can't do this anymore. You need to figure out how to get out of it." And I ran into him shortly after that ultimatum. He offered me his oyster leases, which are actually kind of challenging to get your hands on good ones at this point. Most of the water is leased, and the good water is definitely leased. So I kind of felt like that was the universe telling me, here's something you can do. It's good for people, good for the environment. You get to be on a boat most of the week, fishing on your lunch break, all that stuff. So I said, sure, let's figure it out. I put in my letter of resignation with the public school system, and yeah, bought a bunch of cages, a bunch of seed oyster, a little dinghy, and started gradually taking over his leases. Since then, we've acquired a total of, or including that, we've acquired a total of 66 acres of water, and a good portion of it is just extremely good oyster bottom. So we've got a nice setup. The other thing that kind of sets the farm apart is our leases actually connect directly to our landing. So we have approved water at our dock, which means that we can keep market-sized oysters in float cages at the dock for a final flush before they go out for orders. And that means we can harvest a lot of oysters very quickly because we stockpile quite a bit at the dock. So last minute orders, never an issue. We've had some pretty crazy overnight counting oysters in the fridge situations over the past 3 or 4 years, but it's doable. It's always doable.
So what's the difference between good oyster bottoms and bad oyster bottoms?
Woo, flow is probably the most important thing, the amount of water that flows past during the tide change. The other thing is the actual, like the composition of the bottom. So certain parts of the bay can get kind of mucky and funky, and if you put cages in that, they'll sink down. Oysters will end up in the muck, and then they'll suffocate. But we have really good sandy bottom, and so we put cages down. The legs keep them elevated about 6 inches off the bottom, and they get really good flow where they are. We're not a navigational hazard where we are. So all in all, it's kind of the perfect growing location.
So speaking of perfect growing location, when did you realize that, or did you kind of get that information from the previous owner that this is like, this is where you want to be at?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously was trying to sell me his operation, so I took it with a grain of salt, but he was not lying when he said the way the tide comes around that point drives those oysters wild. So yeah, I mean, I knew a little bit. I had been reading online and had talked to a couple guys who dredged and tonged down in the area just to get a sense of what was good. And everybody's opinion was you get that lease as soon as you can because everybody's going to want it. So if you've got an opportunity, take advantage of it. So yeah, I did. I trusted, but I verified. There were a lot of wild oysters on the bottom, and at this point, there's a whole lot of wild oysters on the bottom for our leases. We don't harvest any of the wild natural oyster. We only harvest stuff that we put in the first place. And part of that is, and concern for the environment and desire to have the best water quality and thus the best product quality. But we also, our biggest customer is Whole Foods, and they have a third-party audit that comes through every year and makes sure that we're doing things properly. And one of the stipulations that they have is that we don't tong or dredge the grounds that we harvest from. And honestly, that vetting process for them makes me really trust buying food at Whole Foods. It's been intense and thorough. So makes me feel good. We passed the test.
Yeah, what is that process like of even getting into Whole Foods? Like from aspiring to want your oyster in there and then going through the process, like is it hard? Is it like how did you get through that?
Yeah, definitely challenging. Dumb luck again. My life is a story of dumb luck. That and surrounding myself with brilliant people. My wife, she is an internet sleuth of epic caliber, and she hunted down the email address for the regional Whole Foods sort of seafood distribution slash procurement lead. And she sent him an email and sweet talked him into giving us a shot with a sample. And as soon as he said, yeah, I'm interested, here's the process, we dove directly into it. And it took about 4 months to get through all of the processes. But once we were in, man, they've been a great customer.
So is Whole Foods like another customer, or is it a little bit more than that? Because then is it more like a partnership, or do you just, I mean, and not downplaying, just being a customer, but I just want to know, like, is it as simple as, dropping off oysters and keeping it moving?
Not exactly. You, I guess you could approach it from that sort of philosophy, but I don't think you would be very successful longer term with them. The most important thing we've done with them is demos. So am one of those guys that stands in the grocery store and hands out a sample of their product. It's been actually a lot of fun. You meet a lot of really interesting people, and you hear positive feedback, and get an opportunity to go shopping for fresh fruit, which is a nice bonus. But yeah, it's very much a partnership. We have to be involved, and spend some time on keeping them happy. But they've got a lot of really good people there who are very sharp and know what they're doing, and so the collaboration is always just smooth, very smooth. So we've been doing demos for quite a while with them, and it has really had a positive impact on not just our sales with them, but our brand recognition as well. We're in all of the Mid-Atlantic stores, so everything from basically the PA line down to the North Carolina line. But then we're also in their Southern Pacific region, so LA, San Diego, out on the West Coast. And we've been doing Mid-Atlantic demos for a while now, but we're going to be stepping into doing some Southern California demos as well. So a little bit more of a logistical situation since it's, pretty far away, but we've seen such positive feedback and outcome from Mid-Atlantic that it's worth sorting out how to get myself to LA for a little while.
A good problem to have.
Yeah. And a business expense. So.
Right. Write that thing off. Yeah. Um, so what's been your biggest lesson that you've learned from being a oyster farmer and now, really, scaling this thing up?
Relationships. That's honestly the number one most important thing. You can have a great product all day long, but if you don't have people to help you figure it out, get it where it needs to go, if you don't have a good team underneath of you, if you don't have friends in the industry and in distribution companies and in restaurants and all that, you're not going to make it very long. You have to develop those relationships and maintain them. It's I can only take a small fraction of the credit for the success that our farm has had. It's been a lot of people that have pitched in, paid and unpaid, making money off of it or not. It's people. It's all people. That and
Where do you,
luck, I guess.
everybody needs a little luck. Where do you see this company in 10 years?
Well, I would love to get to a point where we are a national brand with Whole Foods. That would be great. We're working on more distributors in different regions of the country. Right now, we're on the coasts. And I would really love to start tapping into the center of the country. There's a lot of opportunity in the middle of the country. There's lots of oyster fans and not as much access to oysters as we have on the coasts. So we have logistics figured out to get oysters anywhere, both wholesale and retail. So it's just a matter of getting my boots on the ground and knocking on kitchen doors and saying, hey, this is me and this is what I got. Here's why my oysters are the best, and here's what I can do for you, because reliability is our focus when we deal with customers.
So why are happy oysters the best?
Well, because we keep them very happy. We have really just a magic set of leases. The water's really good there. The Northern Neck is such a small population. I think there's only about 12,000 people in our county. We have 2 stoplights in the whole county. The biggest industries are seafood, so commercial fishing, and logging, so the timber industry, with crop agriculture coming in third. So we have practically no runoff coming into our river. The big watersheds go to the north to the Potomac or the south to the Rappahannock. and we are the only hatchery on the Great Wicomico, at least at the moment. So the oysters that we're growing are bred there. They are taken very good care of when they are small, and as they grow, they stay in just the best possible environment for oysters. So, plus the Great Wicomico is a great tasting oyster. It's not aggressive in any of the flavor categories from that terroir wheel. It's just well balanced, very eatable. That's how I like to describe them. They're just an eatable oyster. There's only so many really salty oysters that I can eat, but that middle of the road where you know it's from the ocean, but it's not like taking a big gulp of seawater, they're perfect. And they're fat because the environment is really conducive to them growing really good meat. They're firm, they're fat, they're never thin and watery. And the other thing is we also weed out the vast majority of the weak shells. So one of the biggest issues that we've heard from chefs and from end users is having a hard time shucking the oyster. Sometimes the shells can be thin, they can be brittle. We have a boring sponge in the mid-Atlantic, and if you ever get an oyster and it's got that orange kind of pithy color to its shell, looks like Swiss cheese, that's a sponge that's actually eating the calcium. And so we are able to, through a process of both continual desiccation and from a final processing technique that we've figured out, we're able to weed the vast majority of those out. So the shells that are coming out of our farm are still not as thick as a wild oyster, but that's a good thing because it means there's room for more meat. But they're very easy to shuck. So I think all around, flavors there, quality's there, and shuckability is there. So I think that's what makes them the best oyster.
What's been one of the biggest setbacks, and how did you deal with that?
Well, definitely, the response to COVID was the biggest setback we hit. Prior to that, we were working exclusively direct to restaurants. We had accounts spread from Baltimore to Northern Virginia. I think at our peak, we had 43 restaurants that we were servicing directly, which meant I was on the road a lot doing deliveries, but it meant all of our eggs were spread out into many baskets. The pandemic shutdown happened, and that took away our market pretty much immediately. So we spent a couple weeks kind of stressed out trying to figure out what we were going to do. I decided I was going to just make a plea on Facebook for retail people to start buying oysters, and it worked. So we started running direct to people's houses, dropping them off on the porch, and that's when my wife reached out to Whole Foods. We started interviewing distributors that we thought would care as much about our product as we do, and we focused on retooling our website, making retail a big thing. And then one of the biggest helps was we partnered with a bunch of breweries and cideries to do pickup partners all around DC. And so we would take orders online, and then we would drop off at one of our partner breweries, and people could come pick up their oysters and a 6-pack of beer or 6-pack of cider. And so when there was only to go happening, that was a real boon for us. In fact, so much so that we still partner with some of our breweries. I'm actually here at Hellbender Brewery right now in Tacoma Park. I'm going to be doing an event tonight, a public event in their tap room. But we are also going to be doing a holiday pickup for Thanksgiving here on Wednesday. And if anybody's interested, you can reach out to us via email, info@happyOystersVA.com. Check out our website. We have a newsletter. We'll also be posting on our Instagram, which is @HappyOystersVA. and you can place an order with us for oysters and then come pick them up and get some great beer to go with them for the holiday. We're gonna be doing it again in Christmas, and yeah, it's been that was the setback, and that was the solutions we ended up having to come up with. But it was definitely scary. You know, having the world shut down was yeah, was terrifying.
You know what's more terrifying than the world shutting down?
What's that?
The unknown,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
UFOs. Tell me a UFO story, man.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So this one would be my request because I love listening to UFO podcasts. But and this is a common topic of conversation around the lunch table at the farm. So my most recent spotting, my wife and I were walking the dog in town. We live in a town called Reedville, and we were walking the dog down the street, and I looked up at the stars because we don't have a whole lot of light pollution there, so we get a nice view of the stars. Some nights you can see the whole Milky Way. It's pretty amazing. But I looked up, I saw three red lights in a triangular form, and the area in between them was blotting out the stars above, and it was absolutely massive. I mean, it must have been a football field in size, and it was relatively close. I would say less than a half mile away. And it's just kind of hovering up there. It's kind of tilting side to side, moving around a little bit, stopping, hovering, moving back. And my wife and I are just sitting there staring at the thing like, what are we seeing? My thought, I thought, let me grab my phone and take a video of this. And then another thought that was not my thought, an intrusive thought came in and said, you don't have your phone with you. Don't waste time looking for it. And so I kept walking and staring at this thing. And it kind of, there were these really tall pine trees. They blocked out my view of it. And so I kind of ran to get around them. And as I was running, two what sounded like fighter jets came screaming in from behind us, and I could hear one split off to the right and the other one come basically straight at me. And as soon as I got to the other side of the trees, the triangular form in the sky was gone, and the two jets came screaming in, did a UE, and left. And I reached down and felt my pocket, and there was my cell phone on me the whole time. So that was, yeah, that's my most recent one. That was a good one, but they happen. People see these things. I think they just had a hearing about it in Congress yet again. So hopefully we will learn the truth that we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Wow. But I wanted just to circle back because I did hear something there. I was like, okay, let's just see what goes down that road. Um, so where I know you talked about you were doing a pop up tonight, and you of course you have the oysters in Whole Foods. What's the easiest way to find out, where you're going to be at next, and if people want to get some of your oysters?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram at Happy Oysters VA. So VA like Virginia Happy Oysters VA. That's our Instagram handle, and then you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. We send those out. We've been much better about social media and newsletter as of late. My wife and I just had a baby girl 3 months ago. So we were kind of wrapped up in all of that and kind of fell off the social media game, but we're back at it now. So we always post when we're going to be somewhere, and the newsletter kind of goes through where we are, what we're doing, maybe a little bit about what's going on the farm, and just keep people informed about Happy Oysters.
Well, man, it's been a real pleasure talking to you about Happy Oyster. And we've known each other for a long time. I was still staying in DC when I first met you. And you gave me that little shucking board, uh,
Yeah.
which I loved. Uh, But you know, I've been wanting to get you on a podcast for a long time. I'm just so glad. And you know, what's crazy is like this conversation would have never happened when I first started the podcast because just the style and way I've, you know, kind of curated these conversations has changed so much over the years. So thank you for taking time. Good luck
Yeah.
tonight at Hellbender. And I hope to see you again soon at, you know, something or somewhere.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure we will run into each other again. We're always we travel the same circles. So
Right, right.
thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. It's good to see you over the internet.
Yes, sir. All right, buddy.
All right.